Hello and welcome to another session on Ask a BA series. Today we'll be looking at stakeholders and stakeholder analysis. This is a very important topic. Now, who are stakeholders? Stakeholders are individuals, groups, or organizations with an interest in change. Now, there are categories of stakeholders, and some of these could be customers, some employees, some managers, some partners, some regulators, owners, suppliers, contractors. It is anyone that is interested in the change that a particular project is going to bring in. And then we talk about stakeholder analysis. Now, stakeholder analysis describes the process of evaluating all of these different stakeholders in terms of their level of power and interest and areas of concern and attitude towards the project. The truth is that your stakeholders can affect the success of your project. They can determine the success or the failure of your project. And that is why we do stakeholder analysis. Now, to do a stakeholder analysis, we usually use what we call a stakeholder map. Now, this stakeholder map or grid is divided into different areas. On one side, we have the power and influence, and on the other part, we have the interest. Now, when you look at this power and influence and interest slide, we break it down into low and high. That simply means the power and interest the particular stakeholder has or the interest the stakeholder has. Now, for the stakeholder grid, we've broken it into four segments. On one segment, you've got the monitor. On another, you've got keep satisfied. On another, you've got manage closely. And on the last quadrant, we've got keep informed. Now, if you follow this quadrant using the power influence grid and the interest grid, you'll see that some people will fall into your low and low section. That means they've got low power and they've also got low interest. For this kind of people, you monitor them. Then there are those who fall into the high power section and low interest. For these people, these stakeholders, you make sure you keep them satisfied. And then there are those who fall into the high power and high interest group. These stakeholders you manage closely. Because they've got high power and high interest, that means that they can affect your project in very serious ways. And then on the last quadrant, you've got people who have low power, but they also have high interest. These people, they're not they don't have a lot of influence on your project, but they have a high interest. And for these people, you must learn to always keep them informed. In other words, you communicate with them regularly and let them know what is going on in the project. It's important you have this stakeholder map that you carry it out when you begin a project so that you can put your stakeholders in the right quadrant and manage them properly. Now, on our next slide, we have what we call understanding stakeholders. This slide helps you to better categorize your stakeholders. For this particular slide, which you can use, we've got a stakeholder name, and so you can put the stakeholders name in that box. You can put the particular project that you are working on, and then you have the contact person. That means their phone number, their email address. For this one, we'll just use an example of somebody called Susan. And then you can determine how much does this project impact this particular stakeholder based on the quadrant in the previous slide. So you are able to categorize that stakeholder into high, how much influence do they have over the project? In this instance, we have high as well. What motivates this stakeholder? You learn to talk with the stakeholder to find what it is that motivates them. That way, that helps you to know how to always easily manage that stakeholder. You also need to analyze how the stakeholder would help your project, how the stakeholder could impact your project. Is it negatively or is it positively? Like in this instance, we have said this particular stakeholder could actually bring about a strike action. So things like that you can plot in this chart, and it would help you to understand your stakeholders more. And generally, when you're managing stakeholders for every project, the first part of your project, which is the project initiation and inception parts, part of the things you want to be doing in this stage is to be able to identify your stakeholder and then analyze your stakeholders using some of the charts we've just mentioned now. So your quadrant and your understanding stakeholder slide. So you analyze this stakeholder. You also devise the stakeholder management strategy. For example, in the previous slide, we just said Susan, we mentioned the thing that easily motivates Susan. So you should be able to identify your different stakeholders and find out how best they can be motivated. And once you know that, that is an effective way of knowing how to manage that particular stakeholder. And then in your project, when you get to the project execution, as the project goes on, what you constantly do is so you review and you revise the stakeholder management strategies that you've put in place. So the management strategy for Susan will probably be different with the management strategy for James. So you need to be able to understand each stakeholder and put them in the appropriate box. And using the understanding stakeholder slide, you can identify how best to manage them based on what motivates that particular stakeholder. And now we have a stakeholder task for you. What I would like you to do is read through this stakeholder task and use the stakeholder slide, which talks about understanding stakeholders, and try and analyze the stakeholders that have been mentioned in this task. Try and put them into the different boxes, different categories, and understand what would motivate them based on the text in this task. You can repeat the same for the particular project you are working on. Thank you very much again for today. This is all we'll share today on stakeholder analysis. Drop your comments, drop your questions, and any particular area you would like me to talk about, please let me know and I'll bring that topic. If you've not subscribed to this channel, why don't you subscribe? Let us grow this channel and can bring more pertinent information that would help you on your business analysis journey. Thanks again for watching and see you in the next